During the final months of World War II in the Pacific, a young Japanese nurse is captured after her field hospital is overrun by advancing Allied forces. Subjected to harsh interrogation tactics by military intelligence, she's forced to kneel in stress positions for hours without food or water. When a battle-weary American sergeant witnesses her treatment during a routine patrol of the detention facility, he's reminded of his own sister back home. Despite strict orders and potential court-martial, he makes a split-second decision that challenges everything he's been taught about the enemy, and discovers that compassion can exist even in the darkest corners of war. The suffocating heat of late 1944 clung to the Pacific Island like a shroud, a constant, oppressive weight that seemed to press down on everything, including the very air one breathed. In a rudimentary detention camp, little more than a collection of tents and corrugated iron structures baking under a relentless sun, the distant, muffled thud of naval artillery offered a grim, percussive rhythm to the buzzing of insects. Inside one particularly nondescript tent, lit by the harsh, unfiltered glare of a single bare bulb, the air was thick with the scent of dust, stale sweat, and something metallic, faintly acrid. On the rough-stained concrete floor, a young woman knelt, her posture rigid, shoulders squared despite the obvious torment. A close-up view of her knees would reveal skin rubbed raw, already swollen and bruised, a stark contrast to the faded, almost delicate fabric of her uniform. Her slender fingers, usually deft and precise from countless hours tending to the wounded, trembled slightly as they clutched a small, worn piece of cloth, perhaps once part of a sash, embroidered with a motif that was now barely discernible. In the dehumanizing crucible of World War II, where enemies were too often reduced to mere statistics or abstract concepts, a singular act of humanity, both quiet and defiant, dared to challenge the very logic of conflict. What truly defines a hero when the line between right and wrong is blurred, smudged, and nearly erased by the relentless pressure of war? Aya Watanabe, barely 20 years old, felt the searing agony radiate from her kneecaps, up her spine, and into the very core of her being. Her uniform, once pristine white, was now soiled and torn, a testament to the chaotic fall of her field hospital just days prior. She was a nurse, a healer, sworn to alleviate suffering. Yet here she was, the recipient of a suffering deliberately inflicted. Her life before the war felt like a distant dream, a gentle murmur of cherry blossoms and the quiet efficiency of a Kyoto hospital. She had chosen nursing out of a profound sense of duty, a desire to serve her community, her nation, and humanity itself. When the war intensified, her path led her to the front lines, tending to the wounded under increasingly desperate conditions. She treated all, Japanese soldiers, and even on one memorable, terrifying occasion, a downed American pilot. His broken leg, his feverish delirium. He was simply a patient, another life to preserve. This unwavering dedication to her profession and the honor of her service, even amidst the looming shadow of defeat, was her anchor. Now, it was also her defiance. The interrogator, Captain Miller, a man whose face was etched with the weary cynicism of countless campaigns, leaned back in his canvas chair, a half-smoked cigarette smoldering in an ashtray made from a shell casing. His eyes, devoid of warmth, bore into Aya. He was tired, perpetually so, and his patience was a commodity long exhausted by the endless grind of conflict. He saw not a young woman, but an intelligence asset, a potential key to enemy movements, a cog in the vast, unforgiving machine of war. His belief, forged in the brutal campaigns of island hopping, was simple. The enemy was the enemy, and any means necessary to extract information and save American lives was justified. He had seen too many good men die, too many friends fall, to entertain sentimentality. His doctrine was pragmatism, harsh and unyielding. The tent itself was a sensory assault. The acrid scent of disinfectant, once a comforting smell of healing in her hospital, now mingled sickeningly with the stale metallic tang of fear and confinement. The rhythmic click-clack of a distant typewriter, amplified by the canvas walls, was a monotonous, maddening drumbeat. Occasionally, the low rumble of American aircraft on patrol overhead served as a constant, heavy reminder of who held the power. Her mouth was a desert, her throat raw from thirst, each swallow a painful rasp. The pain in her knees was a white-hot spear, but it was the humiliation, the deliberate breaking of her spirit, that truly threatened to consume her. She bit down hard on the inside of her cheek, tasting blood, a small private act of defiance. The initial encounter had been a whirlwind of chaos. A quick, terrifying flashback played in her mind, the ear-splitting crescendo of explosions, the shouts in Japanese and then sudden guttural roars in English, the pervasive smoke obscuring vision. Her field hospital, a sanctuary just moments before, became a battleground. She remembered raising her hands instinctively, shielding the few remaining patients, the terror a cold knot in her stomach. Then, the rough hands, the shouts, the dizzying journey to this place. Now she was kneeling, hours later, under the relentless scrutiny of Captain Miller, who loomed over her, his voice a low, gravelly drone demanding information. He pounded a fist on the flimsy wooden table separating them, the sound echoing unnervingly. Aya's reaction was a complex internal struggle. A primal, instinctual fear clawed at her, urging her to break, to give them anything. But this was immediately met by an obstinate will, a deep-seated desire to protect her principles, her comrades, her secrets, however small they might seem. She sought to keep her expression impassive, her face a mask, yet beneath it the terror twisted and turned, threatening to overwhelm her. Her body, however, was less cooperative. Her knees screamed, her back ached with a deep, persistent throb, and a dull, hammering headache had taken root behind her eyes. Her throat, parched for hours, felt like sandpaper. She had been forced into this excruciating position for what felt like an eternity, but she knew the exact time. She had been kneeling there for precisely 2 hours and 17 minutes, when Captain Miller brought his fist down, a final, emphatic blow that left the silence in the room feeling even more oppressive than his relentless questioning. The air crackled with unspoken threats. Reports from the Pacific Intelligence Command marked confidential later revealed the broad authorization for such tactics. Interrogation practices, including stress positions and the deprivation of comforts, were sanctioned for recalcitrant elements deemed vital for operational intelligence. These were the shadows in which men like Miller operated, believing themselves justified. Outside, the sun began its slow descent, painting the bruised sky in hues of orange and purple, a stark and ironic contrast to the grim proceedings within the camp. Sergeant Mac McAllister, his uniform perpetually damp with sweat, his face prematurely aged by the relentless Pacific campaign, moved with the weary efficiency of a man who had seen too much. His voice, usually a gruff but reassuring presence among his men, was currently silent as he conducted a routine patrol around the perimeter of the detention area. He paused, his gaze momentarily drawn to the tent where Aya was being held. He had caught glimpses of her through a gap in the canvas earlier, a small, still figure kneeling. It was just another interrogation, another prisoner. He had witnessed countless such scenes. It was war. His mind, however, drifted to a worn pamphlet he'd skimmed during basic training, a dry, legalistic text titled, "Regulations for the Treatment of Prisoners of War." He remembered the gray areas, the vague definitions, the emphasis on humane treatment often followed by exceptions for military necessity. He knew intellectually that the 1929 Geneva Convention specifically outlined humane treatment for POWs, yet its application in the Pacific theater, particularly concerning non-combatants, was notoriously inconsistent and often ignored. He saw the strictures of combat intelligence often overriding such niceties. A faded, hand-drawn sign on the main camp bulletin board echoed this pragmatic ruthlessness. Priority: combat intelligence, anything that aids in saving American lives. He felt a familiar knot of discomfort, a brief flicker of unease, but quickly suppressed it. He had a job to do. He pressed on, his boots crunching on the gravel, trying to dislodge the image of the kneeling figure from his mind. It was just a job, but the image persisted, a small, stubborn burr under his skin. Mac found himself passing the tent again an hour later, drawn by an invisible thread. This time, the silence from within was broken by the interrogator's raised voice, sharp and demanding, followed by a hushed, almost imperceptible Japanese response from Aya. He couldn't understand the words, of course, but the break in her voice, A fragile tremor that spoke of utter exhaustion and a sliver of despair was universally understood. He glimpsed her again, through the same small gap, her body now visibly swaying on the verge of toppling. His eyes, keen from years of observation, caught sight of something else, something small, nestled in the dark braid of her hair, a tiny ornate wooden hairpin, carved with a delicate blossom. A jolt, sharp and unexpected, shot through him. It was almost identical to the small wooden ornament his own younger sister Sarah wore every day, a gift from their grandmother. The similarity was uncanny, unsettling. The comparison struck Mac with the force of a physical blow. The abstract enemy in the tent blurred, replaced by the vivid, heart-wrenching image of Sarah, laughing, vibrant, utterly innocent. He stopped abruptly, his body freezing mid-stride. The discomfort he'd felt earlier blossomed into a sharp, painful ache in his chest. He tried to rationalize it away. She's the enemy. She's Japanese. They're all the same. But the image of Sarah, smiling, playful, refused to recede. It was a tenacious ghost clinging to his consciousness. Psychological studies conducted decades later would reveal that prolonged physical and sensory deprivation, combined with unrelenting stress, could indeed induce dissociative states in prisoners, rendering them more susceptible to suggestion, yet simultaneously making any information extracted highly unreliable. The cost, both human and tactical, was immense. The words from the intelligence bulletin board about saving American lives now seemed to mock him, hollow and devoid of true meaning. He knew with a certainty that chilled him that this young woman was not a threat to American lives. She was simply a victim like so many others. Aya, her senses dulled by the pain and fatigue, heard the interrogator's voice morph into something even more insidious. He wasn't just demanding battle plans now. He was threatening her family, her village back home, suggesting that her continued disobedience could lead to dire consequences for them. It was a lie, a cruel tactic of psychological warfare, but in her weakened state, the words felt like a fresh wound. She swayed precariously, her vision blurring at the edges, fighting the urge to surrender to the darkness creeping in. Mac, still frozen outside, heard the menacing undertone in Miller's voice, the thinly veiled threat. He clutched the dog tags around his neck, feeling the small, smooth edge of the photograph of Sarah he kept tucked inside his wallet, a constant reminder of home. The contrast between his sister's smiling face and the suffering he was witnessing was too stark, too brutal to ignore. His heart pounded against his ribs, a frantic drumbeat of anger and guilt. He turned away from the tent, walking a few hurried paces, as if to escape the scene, but he couldn't go far. The young woman's bowed head, the interrogator's cruel words, the vivid memory of Sarah, it all coalesced into an unbearable weight. The clear, defined lines between duty and decency began to fray, then dissolve completely in his mind. He knew, with a growing dread, that he was teetering on the precipice of a decision that would undoubtedly land him in deep trouble, perhaps even face court-martial. But the alternative, the gnawing certainty of his own inaction, felt far worse. As Mac hesitated, wrestling with his conscience, a low hum of voices reached him from a nearby supply tent. Two junior intelligence officers, oblivious to his presence, were chatting, their conversation carrying on the warm breeze. He caught snippets, fragments of their discussion about the Jap nurse. One officer mentioned with a dismissive wave of his hand that she was not really a threat, just a medic. Miller's just trying to break her to make an example, scare the others. The other added, almost as an afterthought, "Yeah, heard she even patched up one of our downed pilots before we rolled in. Before she knew he was American, I guess. Some kind of oath or something." This was the midpoint twist, the strategic and moral revelation that utterly flipped Mac's assumptions. He had assumed, like Miller, that this interrogation was a vital, if brutal, military necessity, extracting critical intelligence about troop movements or fortifications. But now, listening to the casual chatter, he understood. Aya wasn't being interrogated for critical battle plans or secret enemy positions. She was being broken, not for information, but for intimidation. It wasn't about winning the war with military strategy, but about psychological warfare, about instilling fear, about dehumanizing the enemy to make them more pliable, or perhaps simply to assert dominance. The intelligence team already knew she was merely a nurse, a non-combatant, bound by a universal oath to treat the wounded, regardless of allegiance. The brutality then was not a means to a strategic end, but an act of calculated cruelty, a moral breaking, devoid of true military purpose. The information, if any, would be secondary. This revelation solidified Mac's resolve. The ethical stakes were suddenly, sharply defined. For him, a direct intervention would mean insubordination, interference with an intelligence operation, and in times of war, potentially even charges of aiding the enemy or outright treason. The specter of a court-martial, of losing his rank, his reputation, his very honor, loomed large. The psychological cost of defying the military machine, of acting against his own comrades, was immense. Yet the cost of inaction, of living with the indelible stain of complicity and quiet shame, felt far heavier. He had seen enough battle to know the difference between necessary violence and gratuitous cruelty, between strategic advantage and moral compromise. For Aya, the psychological toll was nearing its breaking point. Prolonged abuse, unrelenting deprivation, and the constant crushing weight of humiliation were systematically eroding not just her physical strength, but her very spirit. She was on the precipice of mental collapse, the last flickering embers of hope threatening to extinguish entirely. The implications of being perceived and treated as an object, a mere tool to be broken rather than a human being, were devastating. Her identity, her professional pride, her sense of self, all were under siege. Military analyses conducted decades after the war would consistently highlight the questionable efficacy of such brutal interrogation tactics. While torture and coercive methods were employed by all sides during WAS, subsequent studies repeatedly demonstrated that they frequently yielded unreliable or false information, all at the profound cost of degrading the morale of the very troops involved and violating fundamental ethical principles. This particular brand of interrogation was yielding nothing of value, only pain. Captain Miller, his face a mask of frustration, finally snapped. He picked up the half-filled canteen from his table, not to offer it, but to perform a final petty act of cruelty. With a sneer, he emptied the water onto the dusty concrete floor directly in front of Aya, a deliberate, contemptuous gesture of deprivation. "Get up, nurse," he snarled, his voice low and dangerous. "You think you can hide information from us? We have all night. We have all week." Aya, her body screaming in protest, swayed violently. The sight of the water, cool and clean, pooling uselessly on the ground was a fresh torment. Her muscles, long since given over to agonizing spasms, failed her. She pitched forward, a faint cry escaping her lips, her head narrowly missing the edge of the flimsy table. She lay crumpled on the ground, a heap of exhaustion and despair, her breath coming in shallow, ragged gasps. Miller, unmoved, merely leaned over, his voice sharp. "Get up, now." The scene unfolded from multiple angles, each converging on a singular moment of truth. From Mac's perspective, the final, deliberate act of emptying the canteen, followed by Aya's silent collapse, was the tipping point. The image of his sister, Sarah, was no longer just a memory. It was superimposed over the fallen figure, a stark and undeniable reality. The internal battle was over. The line, irrevocably crossed, was behind him. With a cold, silent determination that belied the turmoil within, he strode towards the tent flap. Each step was heavy with consequence, but fueled by a righteousness that burned brighter than any fear. Aya, shrouded in the encroaching darkness of unconsciousness, heard the splash of water, a mocking sound. The fall was inevitable, a surrender of a body pushed beyond its limits. She lay still, awaiting the next blow, the next degradation. But then she heard footsteps different from Miller's, heavier, more deliberate, resolute, a flicker of something undefined. Captain Miller, leaning over the prostrate Aya, a sneer twisting his lips, was poised for another round of threats. He heard the approaching footsteps, an unwelcome interruption, and his irritation flared. He looked up, his expression already one of annoyance. Mac pushed aside the canvas flap, entering the tent with a quiet dignity that instantly transformed the charged atmosphere. His eyes, fixed first on Aya's crumpled form, then on Miller's shocked face, held a steely glint. His voice, usually gruff, was a low, resonant whisper, yet it cut through the oppressive air with an undeniable authority that echoed through the small space. "That's enough." The words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken command. Miller's jaw dropped, frozen mid-sneer. Mac ignored him. He knelt, not in confrontation, but in an act of profound compassion, reaching out a hand, firm and gentle. He slid an arm under Aya's back, supporting her, easing her up from the cold, hard ground. Their eyes met for a fleeting instant, hers wide with shock and a nascent, fragile recognition, his filled with a quiet resolve. Miller, still speechless, could only stare, dumbfounded. The immediate fallout was swift and severe. Mac was immediately relieved of duty, escorted out of the detention area by two grim-faced MPs, and confronted by a furious senior officer. An immediate formal investigation was launched. He was promptly transferred to a remote, less consequential posting, effectively sidelined and awaiting disciplinary action. The ripple effect within the camp was palpable. Some soldiers whispered about his insubordination, dismissing him as a bleeding heart. Others, however, harbored a quiet respect, a secret admiration for the man who had dared to break ranks. Aya, disoriented but profoundly grateful, was gently taken to a camp medical ward, not by an interrogator, but by a quiet, kind army medic who carefully examined her bruised knees and parched throat. She was given water, warm food, and a place to rest, a stark contrast to the interrogation tent. She was still in shock, but the kindness, the unexpected intervention, ignited a fragile spark of hope within her, a realization that even in the heart of brutality, humanity could endure. She never forgot Mac's face, the quiet strength in his eyes, the gentle firmness of his hands. Captain Miller, incandescent with rage, found his authority undermined. Mac's brazen act, witnessed by others, created an uncomfortable precedent, a crack in the facade of unquestioning obedience. Years later, the war a distant, bitter memory, Mac, disillusioned by the rigid bureaucracy and moral compromises of military life, left the army. He carried the scars of his actions, the official reprimand, the missed promotions, the whispers of his softness, but he carried them without regret. His life was simpler, quieter, haunted by the echoes of battle, but also by the quiet satisfaction of that one moment of true courage. He often thought of the young nurse, wondering what became of her. Aya, after the war, eventually returned to a quiet life, resuming her nursing career in a rebuilt Japan. The trauma of her captivity never truly faded, but the memory of the American sergeant, the one who said, "That's enough," remained a beacon of human kindness in the darkest chapter of her life. She found solace in her work, dedicating her life to healing, a silent testament to the universal oath she had upheld even under duress. Perhaps, decades later, a diligent historian uncovers Mac's official reprimand, a minor footnote in countless military records. Or perhaps one day, an elderly Aya, prompted by a news story, finally finds the courage to send a letter, a thank you note, across continents, a faint echo reaching through time. This story serves as a profound reflection on the enduring human capacity to challenge the prevailing norms in the name of morality, even amidst the most profound darkness. It echoes countless untold narratives of small, audacious acts of kindness that punctuated the vast canvas of conflict, proving that humanity, fragile yet indomitable, can always find a way to bloom where it is least expected, leaving a legacy far more significant than any military victory. Sometimes in the chaos of war, the greatest act of bravery isn't wielding a weapon or leading a charge, but simply extending a hand, a gesture of profound empathy that cuts through the noise and reminds us of our shared humanity. Faced with the immense personal cost to your own conscience, would you do what is right, even when the entire world, all its systems and pressures commands you to do otherwise? If this poignant story of quiet courage and profound human connection has resonated with you, subscribe to uncover more forgotten narratives that remind us of the unyielding strength of the human spirit, narratives that make us question everything we thought we knew about history and the true meaning of heroism.